For 4 centuries, the Roman war machine rolled across early Europe. They moved in perfect synchronization, crushing tribal resistance under our relentless, disciplined advance. Roman dominance relied on a massive engineering apparatus. They terraformed conquered territories with highways and stone bridges, physically locking new provinces into the imperial structure. At the core of this expansion was their heavy infantry doctrine. Outfitted in segmented plate armor and interlocking rectangular shields, Roman legionaries fought shoulder to shoulder. In a direct frontal assault, this formation was practically a walking fortress. It had been over 200 years since the Carthaginian general Hannibal enveloped and destroyed a Roman army at the Battle of Cannae. Since then, the legions had operated without peer. Decades of tactical and engineering supremacy insulated the high command from the reality of war. They began to believe their own myth that Roman steel could not be broken. Under Emperor Augustus, the state decided to push its borders east of the Rhine River, deep into the uncharted forests of Germany. To solidify this new territory, Augustus dispatched Publius Quintillus Varus. Varus was an administrator and a politician, not a battlefield commander. He marched into the wilderness alongside 3 elite legions. 20,000 heavily armed men. By his side rode Arminius, a Germanic prince raised in Rome and granted citizenship. Varus trusted him as a scout and an advisor. But Arminius was operating on his own agenda, quietly steering the entire Roman column away from safe routes. 20,000 men of the world's most advanced military were marching into unfamiliar hostile terrain. Commanded by a complacent bureaucrat, and guided by a man planning their execution. This diagram shows the core dependency of Roman military doctrine. To form their legendary defensive battle lines, the legions require wide open ground. In the dense terrain of Germany, that doctrine collapsed. The local tribes did not fight in pitched battles. They utilized the landscape to their advantage, employing asymmetrical fluid strikes that shattered rigid formations. For centuries, a common historical misconception held that Varus and his legions simply blundered into impenetrable woods and got lost. The archaeological record reveals a different reality. Arminius engineered a trap where Rome's technological and numerical advantages were erased by the topography itself. This map illustrates a highly specific geographical bottleneck, known as the Teutoburg Narrows, a pinched land corridor wedged between 2 massive natural barriers. To the north lay the Great Bog. This expanse of waterlogged peat was completely impassable for heavy Roman infantry, carrying weapons and armor. To the south rose cold Crisi Hill. The steep, densely forested incline offered perfect concealment for thousands of waiting fighters. Between these 2 obstacles was a kill zone measuring barely 220 meters across. As 20,000 Romans funneled into this pass, their columns stretched out into a desperately thin, vulnerable line. This extreme compression robbed the legions of the physical space they needed to pivot or lock their shields together. When the attacks came down from the hill, the Romans could not expand outward to mount a counterattack. Arminius had also constructed a series of sand and turf ramparts along the slope. Germanic warriors used these walls to rain down javelins and instantly withdraw before the Romans could retaliate. Within a muddy stretch of earth, no wider than 2 football fields, the most sophisticated military organization in the ancient world was rendered defenseless. A sudden, torrential rainstorm struck the forest, flooding the narrow trail, and instantly turning the ground into an inescapable quagmire of mud. The moisture warped Roman bowstrings, rendering their ranged weapons useless. Meanwhile, their heavy segmented armor absorbed the water and mud, exhausting the soldiers, and turning their protective gear into a fatal liability. Over the course of 3 brutal days, the trapped legions were systematically dismantled. Recognizing that the situation was hopeless, Varus took his own life. By the end of the massacre, 20,000 Roman soldiers lay dead. Equipment belonging to the highest ranks of the Roman cavalry, like this ornate silver-plated face mask, was left abandoned in the dirt. It remains physical proof of the empire's failure in the woods. The Teutoburg ambush proved that the Roman war machine could be bled to death. Nature, geography, and a calculated understanding of vulnerabilities had defeated steel and discipline. When the shockwave reached Rome, a devastated Augustus recognized a bitter truth. The empire had finally reached its geographic maximum. The state initiated a massive strategic pivot. They abandoned further expansion and began constructing the Limes Germanicus, a vast border defense system. Rome transitioned permanently from a nation of conquerors to a nation of defenders. That defensive posture held the borders for centuries, but it eventually bred complacency. 400 years later, by 410 AD, the state had decayed into total imperial apathy under Emperor Honorius. While Honorius reportedly sat in his palace quietly feeding his pet chickens, the city of Rome was actively being sacked by Gothic armies. The Western Empire would take another 4 centuries to disintegrate. But in the Teutoburg Narrows, the momentum of Roman expansion stopped permanently. The legions had found their limit, beginning a transition from an unstoppable force into a stationary target.